It is my privilege to invite His Excellency Mr. Javed Ashraf, Ambassador of India to France, Mr. Abhishek Singh, President and Chief Executive Officer, National E-Governance Division, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, Mr. Rahul Mathin, Partner Trilegal, Mr. Sanket Atal, Managing Director, Salesforce India Operation, Site Lead, Technology Marketing Product at Salesforce. This panel will be moderated by Ms. Sarayu Natarajan, founder, Apti Institute.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's wonderful to be here. I feel very privileged to be moderating this really stellar panel. I had a brief conversation this morning with one of the panelists, and we both agreed that this is one that we would like to listen to as audience members. As a moderator, I have some of that luck. This panel discussion and the summit come at an opportune time. We are at a critical juncture of the India stack with 1 decade elapsed and the decade coming up. I am not one for quotes, but one widely attributed to Bill Gates comes to mind. We overestimate what we can do in 2 years, but underestimate what we can do in 10. And in that sense, 2022 is an interesting point. We can both look back at the lessons learned from the India experience and go forward to be ready for what the coming decade holds. The inquiry for today's panel is therefore how to deepen the stack's impact in India and widen its reach internationally, particularly as newer elements of the stack, like the consent architecture, starts to get built out. Dwelling on the stack briefly, it is a technical toolkit that comprises several elements, exchanges, registries, APIs, consent managers, and more, that allow governments, businesses, and civil society to build context-relevant applications upon them. It offers the potential to democratize access to technological tools. But interestingly, India has not just built the technological tools, but through a consultative and sometimes fractious process, built out layers of governance around the stack. Equally, elements of the technology have been imagined in ways that accord both with statutory expectations as well as norms, such as privacy by design. The stack is not without challenges, though. Inclusion, particularly in areas where the stack is deployed in domains connected to rights guaranteed by the state, is a concern. From the perspective of internationalization, deploying the stack in countries where there might be non-democratic value systems and challenges to institutional capacity is also an open question. The role of the private sector, especially smaller firms, in increasing reach and benefiting from the innovation opportunities also needs to be understood. 2022, where India has taken over the leadership of the G20 and the Global Partnership for AI, the GPA, is a perfect moment to ponder upon these questions. How does India deepen the impact of the stack? What role does it play in widening the stack? And how will it be implemented? These are all big questions to tackle in a 50-minute panel, so I'll now go over to the discussion very quickly after a quick note on the structure. We hope to have introductory comments from the panelists first. We'll then move over to a discussion where hopefully we discuss changes to the stack itself and how it might need to evolve, understand the nature of relationships that are required, and also think a little bit about sustainability and growth. We then hope to have a few minutes for questions. Over now to Mr. Ashraf. Mr. Ashraf, in the current geopolitical scenario, how might we see India's strategic advantage? What opportunity does the G20 presidency offer? Over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you for including me in this panel and in this Global Tech Summit. But for the fact that I'm here in Delhi for an annual India-France Defense Dialogue, I would probably have spent the day listening to eminent panelists. It's truly evolved into something quite significant internationally. To come to, I think Rahul, with whom I've had the great privilege of learning and clarifying many thoughts, has, I think, in a sense, enunciated some of the key issues and challenges. First, the fact is that there is a global recognition of the fact that we've built something which reflects a certain kind of political ideals and aspirations, and that it has served as an instrument of social and economic transformation, inclusion, and empowerment. And when I say that it reflects political ideals and aspirations, it's really about an open, free, inclusive, and a democratic public digital infrastructure, which is not owned by the big tech or by the state, and which has fostered a climate of innovation, which is in part responsible for the kind of exciting startup ecosystem that we have. Now, that recognition is there. But I think internationalizing it is perhaps far more challenging than bricks and mortar infrastructure. There is a fundamental issue of trust to begin with, and very vastly different political, policy, administrative, institutional, and market structures. But more than the technological aspect, it is to really build an international architecture of collaboration in something which is unprecedented and has never been attempted before. And there are essentially three models on which we can work, which is based on our experience. And before I get into it, let me tell you some of that you heard. In 2016, after I had left my one job and I was still to go to Singapore, I was involved in a very intense dialogue with the advisor to the UN Secretary General on SDGs, and he's also the chair of the Broadband Commission, for an UN-India exclusive partnership for an Aadhaar-like project all across Africa. And his objective was that Africa cannot achieve SDGs without implementing India-like structure. We also had the money. I mean, he was later foreign secretary will tell you, we have a lot of money for Africa. And we'd worked out a structure also. What was the UN going to do? It was to legitimize and mobilize the African countries. And the first point that came out was in the first meeting of Broadband Commission, 20 African countries signed up. And across different political structures. Some were democratic, others were not. But each saw an incentive for the political leadership in implementing this. I mean, this is an important point. They could see immediate delivery. Also, perhaps a larger design in being able to control what was going on. But I don't think we were ready for it. Perhaps the idea, I couldn't socialize it enough here, and perhaps it was too premature. But I think we missed an opportunity over there. And the second was, of course, we just heard in Singapore, when we had the payments product done over there. That was, again, really about trust, about Monetary Authority of Singapore, led by Swapnendu Mahanti. Perhaps more invested. Swapnendu was more invested in it than our regulators were. In fact, at that stage, NPCI said, we are a rupee thing, we don't want to do this outside. RBI was not interested. But it was really them who were driving it. And it tells you that it is not the technological aspect, the complexity is in connecting people. And it couldn't have been done unilaterally. I couldn't have gone to Southeast Asia and ASEAN countries and say, and by the way, ASEAN was similar to us in payment before we launched our payment, UPI and others. The third is, of course, he spoke about in France, where we've had this infrastructures, India-France structures, and when they came, they spoke about the India stack, but also DEPA and things. And in April, we had this India-France structures. We love these acronyms, so it was infrastructures. And before that, we had Infinity, India-France Innovation and Information Technology. And Viva Tech also, we were a big participant, Country of the Year, which is the largest digital fair. The central theme was to socialize the idea of this. But you know, I have always grappled with the problem of operationalization, and you have a point there. And now I can see three models. One is, it happens autonomously. Gates Foundation, Omidare, or NORAD, or USAID, or someone, or some other company talks to some of our Indian companies and says, let's do it. MOSIP was a product of that, right? But it has gone to Morocco, it has gone to Philippines. And I have to say, in the spirit of my job, what is the strategic advantage we draw from it and how effective it is in globalization process. The second model is we do it ourselves. We go to country in Africa and say, look, we'll do this for you. Chances of its acceptance is fairly limited. Third is that we create, and this is the point, and I'm going to end there, is to create a sort of a global standards that we help foster, in which we involve other participants as well, from the developing world and the developed world. I mean, he mentioned France. I can't tell you, by the way, we should soon be making UPI and RuPay active in Eiffel Tower and Galeries Lafayette and things. It's on course. So you should be able to use UPI to make payments to get in for a ride. But that's only half the story. He mentioned there's so many different verticals. And when we had this infrastructures on April 8, and Mr. Nandan Nilegani and I had spoken, and then their Secretary General spoke, there were 60 people sitting in Bangalore, 60 in Paris. What they discovered was philosophical convergence. Forget about coding and things, that this is the way to go about doing it. And there was a desire to start working together the next day. So collaboration on the foundation of trust is going to be critical, particularly in a world that is increasingly fractured, divided, and underpinned by great technological disputes that are emerging as what I call geopolitics 4.0, as in industry 4.0. But so what do we do in G20? This is since this thing. One is you can talk about statement of principles. Leaders come out with a lofty declaration, and that's where it will end. Second is you get them to endorse India's initiative and say India's done something remarkable. That will also remain in the realm of declaration. Third is, do you get multilateral institutions, World Bank and IMF, OECD, and other multilateral institutions, to say that we will adopt this and run with it. But that will still be a problem of whose standards, what standards, do we have different architecture? I mean, the problem we have with charging, for example. So my suggestion is that if we in India can create a sort of a technology standards organization, if we can create, call it a center of excellence, which we say we will host, like we host the International Solar Alliance Secretariat. But we say we will bring in experts, not government alone, not government officers like us in this, but lawyers, technology experts, innovators, people who know what setting standards are all about. If we are able to do that, that will be the greatest gift. It will still be, if I want to be parochial and patriotic, I would still say it will still be an India-centered, India-located. But it will create that sense of trust, a sense of participation, and a belonging. In digital, more than in the roads and the BRA kind of projects, this is going to be the key to our success.
Thank you for that, Mr. Ashraf. I'd love to come back to the question of this organization, standard setting, and the role of partnerships more broadly. But I'm going to take the conversation to Mr. Singh to ask what the last decade of the India stack has looked like, to understand how it has been built out, what have we achieved, and what is left of that journey, and how have entities across the ecosystem benefited from it.
Thank you, thank you. In fact, I must compliment Rahul and Ashraf sir for setting the tone for this. But when we have to look at what India has done, what India Stack is, and what we have done in the last decade or so for building digital public goods at population scale, I'm sure this audience knows most of it. But the key tenets of building such artifacts, which are becoming basic building blocks of whatever we build in the digital space, are that whenever we design anything for India, whether it's the Aadhaar or the UPI or the CoWIN or the digital health mission that we are doing, we design for scale. Like anything that we do, it's not a pilot, it's not a POC, it's not that it should just work in a test lab environment. It has to work when millions of people access that system and they access at the same time. So that becomes very, very important. Then the other thing that we always do is that how do we design it in an interoperable manner so that any application which is there, it should not be serving a particular purpose in a silo. It has to integrate, it has to talk to other systems and ensure that citizens get a whole of government approach. Like for example, identity piece, it's not that it's for itself. That identity piece becomes the basic building block whenever I am issuing a Abha ID with the health mission or a farmer ID or a student ID in the education system. So that becomes the cornerstone of building the same thing. Similarly, for the UPI, the way it enabled, the way it transformed financial transactions is the simplicity of its design and how it could talk, it could ensure protocol-based conversations between multiple financial institutions, multiple banks, and enabling even low-value financial transactions across the whole system. And if we look at that, and I would like to just mention about another project which is enabling, like Aadhaar enables like a presence-less kind of system when you have established the identity. UPI enables the cashless kinds of transactions that we have. The another initiative which is a part of the India stack, which I would like to mention, the DigiLocker initiative, which enables a paperless kind of interaction. And that, along with the API-based verification of credentials. So verifiable credentials is something that's going to be the next level of digital governance in the sense that it will allow integrating disparate systems. It will allow citizens to access public services without having to require to prove their identity or prove their any document again and again. So that is enabling something like ask only once. If there is any credential that is available with the government, then with the consent of the citizen, as per the DEPA architecture, one should be able to allow that to be shareable across and verified. Like for example, the integration of the proof of address and proof of date of birth with the Passport Seva project. What it enables is that now when you apply for a passport on the Passport Seva project, you don't even have to upload a PDF. You just have to give your consent to verify the date of birth and the address from the DigiLocker documents which are already there with the government. So that transforms, like you, instead of paperless, you're not even submitting PDF documents. Similarly, like when you allow systems to talk, like the Rural Development Ministry implements the Manrega scheme, in which wage employment is given to millions of people. So all of them, they have a Manrega card, and the one department is verified that this fellow is poor enough to be doing wage employment. Now the eligibility of doing that and the eligibility of getting a Ayushman Bharat health card or getting a ration card or being eligible for a toilet in the Swachh Bharat or a rural housing is almost the same. So if this data with the consent of the citizen is shared across, then the other department need not try to verify the eligibility of the person again. And that kind of transforms. The verifiable credentials, API-based interactions is enabling a transformative governance kind of thing, which is already in place in there. And this is going to be the next phase of digital transformation projects that we are doing. The second initiative about which I would like to mention, which is going to transform the way we access services, is the language piece. Because the Bhashini project which we have launched, which would enable seamless API-based transactions between people who use different languages, how to access services. And the Bhashini project is releasing these APIs in the open source, which will be made available for all the entrepreneurs and everyone who is building a solution. That would allow independent of language access to services. And the second part about it is that the voice-based access to services. Just like we access Alexa and Siri on services, we will be able to talk to our phone and say that, hey, can you track my passport, or can you track my driving license, or how do I get a birth certificate, or how do I get a scholarship? So the voice-enabled services is already live on the Umang platform in English and Hindi, and we are working on to ensure that in a few years, in a few months, it will be available in other Indian languages also. And that would truly empower the 500 million Indians who would require a voice interface to access public services. So that's very important. And all these initiatives have a lot of learnings for the global community, and all of it is being made available on the indiastack.global platform. And any country who wants to join this Digital Public Goods Alliance or Digital Public Goods Repository can join that. We can contribute to that. We can learn from others. And at the same time, whatever we have implemented can be offered to this kitty.
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. Singh. And it seems very much that interoperability is partly technical, but also much normative in that sense, that it addresses concerns beyond just the functional interoperability between different systems. I'd like to bring the question then to Rahul. besides interoperability or unpacking interoperability a little bit, what advantages to the economy and society does internationalization of the stack bring? How will this process of internationalization look, and how might the stack need to change depending on the context where it's implemented?
So I feel Ambassador Ashraf answered everything, and we can just pack up the
Wrap
panel
the
and
panel
leave.
discussion up.
Because I think a lot of what he said really goes down to the nuts and bolts of how we should do this internationalization. But I think at least my experience doing this in France was, I think at the principle level, the stack works fine, because the principles are very, very simple. It is data resides in silos. It is possible to transfer data from one silo to the other. So I'm talking about data, which is the highest end of the stack, but all the building blocks below that are necessary in order to be able to do that. But if we can talk about what's required at the highest end of the stack, it flows for everything else. So I think, if we simplify it to say that it is data that moves from one silo to the other to give you benefit that you would not have been able to get because it was locked in a silo, you can then apply this in any context. And I think if you heard what Dr. Sharma said in the health panel, if you were there while we were discussing it with municipalities in France, where we talk about this idea, and immediately they say, look, this is another way to do it. This is solving a problem that I had, and now I find a way to solve it. I think you realize that there is really not very much to be done other than to get out of our own way. Because I think what we tend to do, and infra was a good explanation of that, because we tend to come out with explaining the solutions that we've built, not realizing that we don't need to. We just need to abstract it to the principles, because everyone has a different, has a need for a different solution. And if we prescribe our solutions to say, look, this is the way to do health, this is not the way to do health. This is the way that it works in India. But in France, they have a completely different problem. And in Rwanda, they have a completely different problem. And all those problems can be addressed at a principle level, but we have to, simplify the stack to this principle level. And I think it's already done. I think it's just a question of articulating it in the way. And as I said, just get out of our own way, because I think we're so keen to show all the things that we've done and we expect everyone to do it that way. No, let everyone do it their own way. But the principles and the idea is what we should do.
Right. Thanks for that, Rahul. I'm going to bring this to Sanket now to ask a little bit about how India Stack has benefited business, because in the conversation about digital public goods, the notion of the state has been very central. But business has been a critical element in both operationalizing the India Stack and making sure that its impact is felt. So we'd love to hear your perspectives on the benefits to business and how business is involved.
Of course, thank you. So it's, first of all, the whole story is so remarkable. It's amazing hearing my co-panelists talk about this, right? The audacious goal of Aadhaar and then getting to the point where UPI is ubiquitous. It's just amazing. And this morning, Amitabh Kant was talking about how without any single paisa loss, we're able to transfer tremendous amounts of money. And all of this has set the foundation for businesses to truly leverage. I mean, the entire world is talking about going digital. And what we have done is we have democratized the whole concept of going digital across India. So small businesses are benefiting tremendously. You go around any corner and, just even 7-8 years ago, the whole concept of digital payments was not there. Today, everybody has a little QR code and you can make payments. I don't remember the last time I used cash. So there are two areas which I would like to just point out, which I think will be interesting. So we talked about the technologies involved in enabling it. We talked about the silos that you mentioned, Rahul. There are areas which I think if we enable through the India Stack, it'll truly help us on the path to having more collaboration internationally. So the first one I'd like to talk about is the startup ecosystem. I'm very passionate about the startup ecosystem. India, as all of us know, is number 3 in the world, and it's growing rapidly. The amount of money that's been flowing into the ecosystem has just been tremendous. And over the past year, my goodness, almost every week you hear of yet another startup becoming a unicorn. But one of the things that's there, and we've experienced it, I just started the startup program at Salesforce about a year back. It's doing really well, but getting access to information about startups is not that easy, right? There are various entities that keep track of these things, but how do you actually give people access to the information and allow startups to express themselves in the way? So I think having a national registry of startups that's available throughout, perhaps through APIs, which allows people with money looking to invest in India have a credible source and a centralized location to do that, would be a great enabler for startups. That's one. The other one is related to that. Sustainability is a key value of the company I work for, and going net zero is something that I think all of us endeavor towards. And so one of the main things that all of us learned, the first thing we learned in management is you can't manage what you can't measure. So there's a prevalence of applications that allow you to measure your carbon footprint. We have a product called the Net Zero Cloud, which allows you to actually measure how much of a carbon footprint you have, take a look at what are the areas, come up with strategies to reduce it. In addition to that, in case there are areas where you're finding it difficult, perhaps in the supply chain, you can't truly reduce your carbon footprint, you can offset it by buying carbon credits. So I mention all of this because, the whole concept of having net zero carbon credit marketplaces is coming into vogue. The way they work is you have businesses that are interested in doing work around sustainability. They have projects that they can put forth which contribute towards a better ecological future of the world. And they can actually, in turn, sell information about this and sell carbon credits to companies that need them. So these marketplaces are evolving. So what would be really interesting is if we're able to establish some kind of an aggregator framework in India, which allows people interested in purchasing carbon credits to go across multiple these marketplaces to be able to purchase. And at the same time, it increases the percentage of startups that are involved in sustainability. Today, majority of the startups are all around technology. So it'll encourage them, it'll be a source of revenue for them as well, and I think we'll be on the path to sustainability with a win-win situation. So these are two areas I'm quite passionate about.
Thank you for that. It's interesting that you bring up the notion of democratization of access. I was thinking about democratization very differently, so perhaps we'd come back to that conversation. But I'd like to bring this to Mr. Ashraf, particularly what you said about partnerships and needing to have relationships globally. What institutions, multilaterals, philanthropies, other entities might be relevant in the task of internationalizing the stack? And how might we engage with them? Over to you.
I think, one of the salient points that come out of this is, of course, there is a continuous need to socialize the idea internationally. I mean, it is known to a lot of experts, but not necessarily at all levels. And this was an eye-opener for us when we did these infrastructures. Now, you would recall, Rahul, that France, the Ambassador for Digital Affairs said that India's data standards are similar to GDPR. But he said you have better technology solutions for enforcement, which they use a more legal system. You violate it, I'll fine you. So, and big tech can pay a few $1 million, that's like a daily change, or $1 billion. So when you hear a partner like France, one of the G7 countries, advanced country, part of EU is supposed to have very high standards, when they endorse the idea, it creates trust. So we need to start picking out partners that build that trust. Remember, our success, we may congratulate ourselves in. Others may say, well, you don't have the following features that are important for us. The second is the point that Rahul made, is how do you recognize that it doesn't, Abhishek made a great point about how they have said that anyone can join it, and we have really made it as a global public good. It's not just us, right? But the thing is about how it meets different needs, different political, institutional, and social architecture. using the same basic principles, because that is how we have been able to create infinite verticals. There is no limit to the number of verticals we can build around this. So this idea, and I'll give you one specific example. Last year, there was a France summit on Africa. There was a big talk there that it's not just about money, credit, it's about creating livelihoods, small businesses. It's about, I said, look, involve us in this. You know, if you involve us in this, we will create for you, with you, working with you for Africa in French language, something that will help small businesses in Francophonie, will help citizens get into financial inclusion. So we have to seize these opportunities. When you speak of multilateral institutions, I mean, I would say that, you know, sometimes you will find, I'm a little hesitant to straight away jump into multilateral institutions because they come with a whole set of baggage. They have kinds of conditions that will shut you out even before you start. Or you change it into something you don't recognize to start with. So let us, I mean, use informal structures. And then, as I said, I mean, G20 has a platform, but we have to be careful, and I must say this with some sense of sincerity, we should not speak from a position of hubris, that we have, and I agree, everyone recognizes no one has done the speed scale, population scale, the kind of verticals we've done. So this is, why I'm saying this is because, take UPI. It is much easier to make it interoperable, which we will, because, you know, there are 30 million Indians wanting to remit 90 billion. They should use UPI. Our people are traveling abroad, let them pay by UPI. But we have to also think of what is the purpose behind us trying to globalize this. Is it influence? Is it prestige? Is it to help the world achieve SDGs? Is it to create market opportunities for my young startups over here who will be the downstream beneficiaries of this? These are questions, and if you don't answer these questions, you will end up in a position where somehow BRI ended up, which is it will look like a unilateral effort talked down to people. So let us create a more collaborative, collective effort, because to me, this is the 21st century response to the bricks and mortar exercise that they conducted with them. So it's very careful, and the G20 is a platform, but let's not assume that it is somewhere where we just say this is what we've done. It's something where we have to involve, get them to endorse the principles that matter to them. For example, data. For example, privacy. For example, security. The cyber resilience of these things. And then out of this will flow, people will ask us, how can you do it on a scale and speed like this? These seems self-evident to us, but it isn't to the others. So it's a complex exercise. It must be nuanced. It must be calibrated. Pick out the right partners. There was a reason why they chose France, not because of me. It's because of the philosophical approach that President Macron has, which is very similar to what our Prime Minister has. And we knew France can carry this in European Commission. If we get in a buy-in from European Commission, it'll be easy. But UPI becoming European payment interface is not that logical. We'll have to start building ground up. If you make UPI acceptable in one country and people say it works, then you will start making it. So there are multiple layers at it, but we must recognize and be sensitive to what others want us to do with them at home.
Absolutely. In that sense, what you said, Mr. Ashraf, answers the question of what it takes for a state to implement a system, or DPI, DPG in its context. But the notion of adoption goes beyond what the state may wish to have done in its territory. Acceptance, adoption of digital systems is built on trust, even at the societal level. And I'd love to bring this to you, Abhishek, to understand a little bit more of the journey of adoption of DPIs within India itself. What has it taken to build trust at a societal level?
Like, again, coming back to the basic structures of the digital public goods that was made, it was, the core of it was that it was made in such a way that it was universally applicable. It was not designed in such a way that it will be available only to a select group of people. So whether it was Aadhaar or whether it was UPI or whether it's DigiLocker, it's available to each and every person. The mandate has come from the government. The design and the ownership has come from the government, but the actual implementation is not by government itself, because the government programs for long has been known for inefficiencies and all kinds of problems that are associated with that. But in all these digital public goods, the involvement of the Indian private sector and the Indian tech talent that we have has been core to that. So whether it was the leadership of Mr. Nilekani for Aadhaar, or whether it was the involvement of the whole set of volunteers, as we call them, in UPI or in DigiLocker, that has been core to the success of all our digital public goods. So driving innovation while ensuring that the state ownership is there. Funding has been primarily from the state. We have not tried to price it. Like, it's not that you have to pay something to do a UPI transaction, or you have to pay something to get an Aadhaar card. This entirely has been funded by the government so that it becomes easier for people to adapt it. Then the simplicity, the way it has been, like even for Aadhaar, to get an Aadhaar number, you don't require multiple papers or multiple documents. You just require your fingerprints, your iris, and basic 4-5 name, gender, age, those basic parameters, that you get it. Similarly, the UPI, it's like idiot proof. Like, just scan a QR code or do that. So it doesn't require too much of complicated way of functioning. Similarly, the vaccination platform, if we can call it. Again, when we were designing the CoWIN, the idea was that we have to make it as simple as possible. So even something like, there's no need to have a login ID and a password. We said that everybody knows OTP, which is like very universal. So make it an OTP-based system. Selecting vaccination sites, downloading the vaccination certificates became very easy. So simplicity of design, making things as scalable. And one more thing that I would mention is that privacy by design and security, the secure systems. Till date, in spite of whatever people may have said, that Aadhaar data has been safe, there has been no hacking, even though there are multiple private sector run banks and solutions which have lost data, which have been hacked into, but our systems have been secure till date. They have been done in such a way that no data of any citizen leaks, and it has been designed to offer benefits to people. Like, for example, DBT. We were able to do DBT during COVID, which many other countries could not. Even the US is struggling to track the pandemic relief that they have given through paper checks and plastic checks for more than $400 billion. And we were able to transfer funds overnight to everyone who was in need of money because of the systems that we have built in. So these were the basic tenets which has led to wider adoption across India.
Thank you for that. But in order to do so, and I think you alluded to it, which is that the state initially has financed very much of this design. I'd like to bring this to Rahul and ask, what does sustainability look like in the context of the India stack? How might financing be structured? What is the role of different institutions here, and how do they need to be governed?
So, very, very complex question when there's 2 minutes on the clock. I would just say that we've got to think about aligning incentives. I like to think of things in triangles. And so, when we think about the types of funding that we need for digital public infrastructure, you have the state, then you have private sector, and then you have philanthropy. I think these are the three sort of sources of funding that you can think of. And they all have incentives that, if you carefully place them at odds with each other, you can implement a self-governing system where each of them, their incentives operate against them, manipulating the system for their advantage. And we've done this in numerous instances. To roll out BEAM, which is sort of the app, the proof of concept app for this digital payment thing that we were trying to sell to people. The government said, we'll build this app and we'll put it out there in the wild. And then once everyone saw this proof of concept and saw that it works, then Google Pay and all of these other people came up. But that initial investment, we can't expect the private sector to do, because the private sector wants a sure shot. And this is just a simple example of the types of incentive alignment that we need to do so that we can ensure that we don't have harmful outcomes.
No, thank you for that. And that sort of tees it up for my question to Mr. Atal. What will it take for the private sector to work on specialized and niche instances to ensure wide and deep impact? What is the role of the private sector in ensuring widening of the stack?
Well, I think like Rahul just mentioned, what we have here is a platform that has been proven to be incredibly scalable and incredibly secure. I think that's good enough. Private sector is coming in. You know, we have PhonePe, we have Google Pay doing amazing things. So this is the age of leveraging platforms, right? Figure out your core competency, leverage the platform, and do amazing things. So I think not much more is needed from a fundamental level. If there's a problem, the private sector will jump in and solve on top of the platform.
Thank you for that. Do we have time for questions? Okay, so we'll take perhaps 2 questions, and I'll open it to the moderators. Yes. Please keep your questions very, very short. There's a ticking
Yeah, it will
clock.
be really short. Hi, I'm Pranay from Takshashila Institution, Bengaluru. So my question is regarding internationalization. There was a stress on agreeing on principles rather than specific systems. So are we referring to something like the Quad principles on technology design, development, governance, and use, which was released in the Quad summit? Is that a good starting point to build on for G20? If yes, why? And if not, why?
I don't think that you heard me out clearly, because I spoke about principles, but I also took the whole arc into the creation of technical standards organizations or centers of excellence. And to all the reasons I gave, let me add a couple of more, because I don't want to repeat because of the time constraint. Digital sovereignty is now become a critical national priority for all countries. And particularly, as I said, in the context of geopolitics 4.0. Now, if you want that kind of digital sovereignty, you also want to be able to create this architecture, learn from you by your own people. You want to be able to ensure that data resides within your own country, that you have some sense of a control over it, and that you can unpack the silos and make it, use the data architecture. Which is why what I feel is that all elements are important in creating this sort of a structure. One is, of course, the policy environment, the regulatory, the administrative, the legal, the market, and the technological aspect all have to be combined. And this is not something you can simply take from here and put it there. Your people can do it. We can, as strategic tool, advance it. But ultimately, it will be those people in that particular country who will want to take ownership for it. And for that, you need to be able to first socialize, but also educate on what it takes based on your experience. And then you can offer the expertise that you want. But they would like to have that ownership for the purpose of digital sovereignty.
Yes, thank you. I'm afraid we can't take any more questions because, well, time's been up for a while now. But we hope to continue the discussion outside as well. Thank you very much to everybody. Thanks to the panelists. It's been very enjoyable moderating this.